Hi, this is the Cat's Library. I'll be your librarian today. The most viewed video on my channel is this one. I had this idea that Cheetah Lady's boss was a middle-aged Triceratops guy, and today I'm drawing him and his family. I got a bit carried away. I was gonna do full turnarounds for all of these characters and only got a partial one done, so it could have been worse. Engage speed paint! I think I'm going to go back to the editing technique I used in the 20 characters 5 color video, where I wrote the script based on the recording and then fit the recording to fit the audio. I started out by a quick doodle of a Triceratops from a reference. I briefly considered making this warm-up sketch the family dog, but the idea of anthropomorphic Triceratopses owning a pet Triceratops was too weird at the time. Now I think it's funny, but I'm not going to go back to draw it. So, after the warm-up, I went on to sketching the family. That first guy, who I'm going to call Harold, turned out pretty similar to my initial idea. Next, I drew his wife, Roxanne. Since they're dinosaurs, I figured that they'd be a bit old-fashioned, hence the dress. I have trouble getting posture right on the first try, and specifically Roxanne's posture. I might need to work on that. Then I drew their son, Spencer, nicknamed Sparky, in an action pose. I originally positioned him jumping over his parents' tails. Then I turned Harold's head to face the rest of his family and made Roxanne taller. Next, I drew Roxanne's dad and Sparky's grandpa, Spencer with a C, in contrast to Sparky being Spencer with an S. When I made this first sketch, I was playing around with the idea of more abstract designs, such as making elderly dinosaurs living skeletons, but later decided that that was too dark and sort of mean. I made a conscious effort to make the Triceratopses look related, but also differentiated. Grandpa Spencer has thinner, spindlier spines, as well as a uniquely hunched posture. I could have tried harder on that cane, but it's not the focus, so I'll just have to keep that in mind next time I draw a similar prop. I did not think about his clothes very well, and so he ended up in dress pants and a sports jersey. My headcanon is that this was on Easter, and they all just came back from church. Harold and Grandpa Spencer had blazers on because it was cold and rainy in the morning, but they took off the jackets in the afternoon because there was a heat wave. Not sure why I think that this was on Easter when it's currently midsummer for me. I opted for 2 grandparents who were married. Harold might have 2 parents as well, but that would be a lot of characters to draw. There are a total of 6 characters in this drawing. I'm going to say that this was a family portrait where the Harold Triceratopses just went to visit the one set of grandparents, but have other family members who weren't featured. Maybe they live out of state. The grandma, Winifred, ended up as one of the best characters in this illustration. I gave her a blouse and dress pants along with a pearl necklace, a cross necklace, and a wicker basket purse thing. I was much more conscious about her outfit because I want a contrast between her and her daughter. She has her hand on her husband's shoulder as an interaction, which is something I try to think about in group shots. For all of the hands in this picture, I took more inspiration from the tortoise I drew in the last video, instead of the actual feet of a Triceratops, and it ended up looking fairly well. They just look awkward because I'm bad at hands. I repositioned everyone in the composition. First, I moved them to be further up. Then I redrew Harold's coffee to be at a more comfortable angle. I always feel the urge to draw drinks at this really weird angle, since otherwise they just look like the characters are holding a flat square like a phone or something. I need to do studies drawing and shading cubes, spheres, cones, and cylinders. That might help with a lot of my problems, but it's also boring. Still need to though, I roughed in the background that I forgot about and did something unrelated later. Harold and Sparky changed places and I shifted all of the adults to be closer to each other, because I was trying to get over my fear of having characters overlap each other. Then, since Sparky seemed to be looking at something, I gave him a little sister in a fairy costume to play with. I think I've been getting better at drawing characters from behind, because even in the rough sketch, she looks like she's gearing up to try to see if she can jump as high as her brother. For clarity, I'm going to name her Mary. So this next part was my attempt at making a turnaround for Harold before I later deemed that it would take too long to both finish and replicate for the other characters. I started out by taking Harold's sketch and modifying it by putting the head on straight and letting his other hand hang down at his side. Next, I drew a second sketch pass. I flipped it to make sure it wasn't wonky, flipped it back, made a second animation frame, copied and flipped the second pass onto the second layer, and then lined it up with the first frame. I set a tween frame and tried to draw what he would look like facing us head on. This ended up pretty odd. I think I made his face too wide at first because I was following where the frill was on the mostly profile images. I also drew his eyes too high up and far apart. I made a couple tweaks to fit this and then moved on to in between a 3/4 image. I was planning on being much more meticulous with the final layer, but I never got to the final layer. On its own, this drawing ended up pretty good, but I subconsciously moved the tail up in an attempt at foreshortening. I'm not sure how well this captures Harold's likeness. I copied and pasted and reversed this drawing for the other side of the turnaround. It was probably around here that I decided that I wasn't going to finish the turnaround, and so I started coloring him in a test to see what colors I wanted. The shirt was nearly white, the pants were off black, and the main skin/scale color was a darker midtone. He was green because that's a common reptile color with red as the main accent color. I decided to have some color variation with certain scales that I wanted to stand out. Then I colored in all the rest of the frames because I was on autopilot, or I wanted to have at least some basic turnaround. There were 5 frames and I didn't feel like drawing the back shots, so I moved back to the illustration. Something I had in mind for Harold was that he's supposed to have square-shaped language as a level-headed type of guy. This was slightly complicated by all the horns and spikes, but I think I found a good balance. I gave him a more prominent jaw on the final line art pass. I tried a few smaller lines like wrinkles in the shirt and grooves in the toenail things, but overall all of these were very simple designs, and they still took me a long time to get done. I turned off most of the layers showing Harold so that I could focus more on his wife, Roxanne. She accidentally ended up as the compositional focus of the painting since she's in the center, and most of the other characters are turned towards her. She is the only straight-on headshot, and this was an awkward angle because of the horns. I wanted her to have bigger eyes at first because a lot of cartoons I watch have bigger eyes, but they were very overpowering, so I shrunk them back to my normal eye size. My art style is very basic. I tried to add some more detail to the dress, but didn't quite manage it until the line art pass. In this second sketch, I changed the arm and hand pose slightly to be more natural, and for forearms to be a similar length to the upper arms. Roxy has my favorite hands in this picture. Otherwise, I kept the line art very similar to the second sketch. I didn't think I had a set shape language for her, but a lot of the shapes tended to be rounded. I started the coloring process by taking Harold's secondary scale color, like what you see around his mouth, and using it as Roxanne's primary skin color. I wanted all the characters to have some overlap in their color palettes. However, since Roxanne was so early in the process, I had a bit of difficulty with her, since I wanted her to have a few secondary colors that could conceivably be main colors for different characters. This started with the yellow that served as the other scale color, then moved on to the different colors I cycled through for her dress. I wanted her to have a pink dress, and then added an iridescent blue and purple layer because I thought that the dress was too plain or something. I made the collar and belt the same green as her husband's scales. However, I decided that the multicolors of the rest of the dress didn't fit Harold's color scheme and would be difficult to work as a less prominent color in the other designs. So I made it red to match her husband's tie and eyes. Additionally, I made Roxanne's eyes the same color as one of Harold's scales. Next, I started working on Grandpa Spencer. This is when I officially decided that he was made out of flesh, so I made his eye holes into a pair of sunglasses. This guy has a more triangular shape language with his head and more square shape language with everything else. I wasn't really paying attention to the shape language with the body. I think the shapes still ended up pretty appealing. I moved one of his legs to have a sturdier, more believable stance. While everyone else has a perfectly straight tail, he has an interesting curve to it without it being too unbelievably flexible. His toenails are really big, and I don't know why I felt the need to draw them like that. When it came to the line art, I gave him an open-mouthed smile. I changed the cane from having a rounded tip to a square one. I added in a lot more prominent scales. Finally, I flipped the canvas to work on the face before I went on to coloring. Since Roxanne had light green and yellow skin, I thought that Spencer's primary scale color would be a yellowish green. His secondary scale color is the same as Harold's secondary color and his daughter's primary scale color. I got his shirt color from Harold's blue glasses and Roxanne's yellow underscales. His pants are the same color as some of Harold's variant scales. Spencer's glasses are Harold's pants color, and his horns are the same as Harold's horn color. I made up two of Spencer's variant scale colors, but the bright teal is the same as Harold. He's supposed to be Roxanne's dad, but I think I accidentally made him look a little bit too much like his son-in-law. The cane is Harold's coffee color, and the ends of the cane come from Spencer's own variant scale color. Next up is Winifred. I started by drawing her hand on her husband's shoulder. I really like her sleeves. They're pretty sharp looking, and like her daughter's collar, they're supposed to mimic the head crest. I tried a couple times on the second sketch to get the other hand right and decided to put it off for later. I traced the lines that I liked, made some mild tweaks to the legs, and then figured out the arm by bringing the hand up. I sketched out the purse and then moved on to the line art. This was pretty straightforward. I outlined the cross instead of having it already filled in. Both of Roxanne's parents have inward curving horns on the top of their heads, like her, and Harold has horns that stick out. I started Winifred's coloring by giving her pants the same color as Harold's, and then I decided to shrink both her and her husband's heads, since I suddenly decided that they were too big. Spencer was a much more complicated affair since I also had to shrink the horns. I've been trying out this technique where I copy the line art and then fill bucket in the colors so that the colors are where they need to be and the line art isn't affected by my nonsense. The issue with this is that it leaves holes that the line art usually covers, and those become visible if I move them around, so I had to manually patch those up. Back to Banana Dinosaur. First, I gave her that same yellow that I've been using, but I quickly followed it with a green shirt and olive green purse. I want this outfit. I accidentally gave her a 5 o'clock shadow by using that desaturated light green that was still much darker than her main coloring, so it gave a weird effect. Instead, I changed it to a lighter yellow that worked much better. Sparky! With the most active pose in the bunch, he needed a reference, which if I remember correctly I utilized on the line art pass, which is a little late, but I did it. That's also when it started looking good, coincidentally. I made a lot of small changes to the second sketch pass to try to get it halfway appealing. I changed the leg pose and tried to get the hands looking right. This is a weird hand angle. I started the line art process with Sparky's face, because that's what I usually start with, but his face did turn out the best in the illustration. I was very focused on getting the clothes wrinkles to look accurate, even though they probably aren't, and I tried to put a bit of foreshortening on that one leg. I wasn't sure if the kids should have the more prominent scales because it would give them a rougher texture. I didn't give Roxanne or Winifred those types of scales, and the smooth, snake-like look suited them. I finally decided that the rough texture would work for Sparky and went for it. I also gave Harold an ear. Sparky's main scale color is Winifred's secondary scale color. Since the adult guys were darker green and the adult ladies were lighter and more yellow, I decided to vary that for the kids, where Sparky is yellow and Mary is a bit of a darker green. Sparky's other scale color was that same bright green that's been showing up, and his eyes are the highlight color of Harold's coffee. I don't know why I thought that would be genetically feasible. Maybe his grandparents have that color. His pants are the blue color that I've been using, and I tried to make his shirt the darker yellow, but when I set him to grayscale, there wasn't enough contrast, and so I made the shirt Harold's primary scale green. The kids probably got out of wearing their nice clothes in the field. They might have had an earlier picture of just them, but then things came up, and lunch, and whatever, so then for the official family portrait they were back to their play clothes. Mary is the most difficult angle for me, and also in an action pose. I'm hoping that the final iteration is one of those types of drawings where it's anatomically inaccurate, but you wouldn't notice it unless someone pointed it out. Like a smear frame in animation, or when two characters in a movie are turned more towards the camera than each other, even though the characters are talking to each other. I changed the angle and pose multiple times in the secondary sketch, and from the secondary sketch to the line art. She is wearing those wire and fabric fairy wings and a ruffly dress with leggings underneath. I started out by giving her the bright green for her main color and then filled in some desaturated red for the dress, but the scale color was too bright and contrasting, and so I gave her Grandpa Spencer's primary olive coloring. This was still bright and colorful, but it didn't compete with the other colors or draw too much attention. Next, I went on to the background. I forgot that in the initial sketches that I had planned, there would be a hill behind them. I was thinking of having them on a front step of a house, but they were all slightly different levels, and I didn't think to have them just on the porch until just now. And drawing a house is hard, so I drew a field. I tweaked the colors a bunch so that it would help the characters stand out, and put a blue gradient for the sky. It would have been better to have a darker sky, like tone-wise, but I wanted this to be a nice sunny day. Next, I shaded and highlighted and rimlighted all of the characters. I used Roxanne as the test subject to see if the shading colors that I selected were what I wanted, which was a cartoony character with dramatic lighting. I added the shadows directly on the shading layer. While I was going through this process, I moved Mary around and tilted her head to a slightly more feasible angle. I had a bunch of gradients and used different tones to mark out where the strands of grass were. And then I copied this a couple times and displaced them slightly to make the strands more full, and set them to shading and highlight layer settings to make the grass three-dimensional. I may have done something like this twice. Then I realized just how incredibly bright and saturated everything was. So I added some layers to get everything to look a bit more normal, while still looking happy and colorful and like it was still a sunny day. And here's the final result. I'm gonna tell myself that this video was a bit harder to make, so I feel better about taking over 2 weeks on it. I felt like doing something a bit more challenging, so that's okay. I'll see you when I'm see you. Bye!